Welcome back. Day 19 of Hammerween and our third Vampire Weekend. We're looking today at 1972's Vampire Circus, as directed by Robert Young, in his directorial debut, no less. So, this film, unlike most, I'm not just going to do a plot synopsis and review, I'm going to completely gut the plot and give you the most base version possible because so much happens that it would be nonsensical because the film is. And we'll get into reasons and partial excuses for that. So, Count Mitterhouse is brought a young child for sacrifice by Anna Muller, who is a willing subject for him. She's left her husband and wants to serve the evil Count Mitterhouse. They do indeed sacrifice young blonde girl, very young child in this, which is quite horrific. Not the last very young child to die in this. Hammer are pushing the boundaries quite heavily with the murders here. However, the villagers are already onto this. It's almost as if we've picked up at the end of another vampire film. Here come the pitchforks, here come the torches, and there goes the count because they take care of him. But before they do, he places a curse in this town that he will have vengeance. He will be resurrected, and he will have his vengeance upon not just the villagers, but their children as well. Cut to 15 years later, just like Hands of the Ripper yesterday, 15 years later, and the denizens of the town have indeed been afflicted, been cursed, because there's a plague in the town which has seen them quarantined off from the rest of the world. They are happy enough, though, because here comes a circus to entertain them, keep them busy and keep them happy, which isn't that nice. Let's not question how they possibly get through a massive barricades and the only road to town. Everyone else that tries to get shot on sight, but a whole circus managed it no problem. Hmm. They're happy enough just to go with the flow. They enjoy the show, which is, the usual strongman, jester, animalistic things, and uh, animals themselves just being animals is exciting for an audience of this era. And they're led by Adrienne Corey as Gypsy Woman. All she's credited as Gypsy Woman. Insert song here. Um, One of the circus performers is Emil, and we quickly establish he's a cousin to Count Mitterhouse, and the circus is here to help with the revenge plot. So they've waited 15 years, but you're busy. You're a working circus. Can't just drop everything. So they've come along to help the Count resurrect himself, take vengeance upon the town, blah 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 blah. The civic leader of the town, the Burgermeister, played by Thorley Walters, the mayor essentially, but who doesn't like saying Burgermeister? He goes into a hall of mirrors and sees the future essentially that he's going to be bumped off by Count Mitterhouse resurrected, which he isn't really, but still, it's something. And warns everybody in town, he's back, the Count's back. You'd think that would be enough for them to think, we should probably believe him. He's literally the mayor. And we know that he said he would be back one day. Ah, well, the circus said they'll do a second night. Let's just enjoy that. This town is populated solely by morons. There's an idiot in every village. This town is populated by nothing but the idiots. I think all the other villages sent their idiots here just to have a colony. So characters who 15 years ago participated in the destruction of Count Mitterhouse do indeed have their children taken from them and murdered, and they blame it on initially the animals from the show. It's the animals that are doing it because, unlike most vampire attacks, these vampires, like Emil, actually do turn into animals, which they do so mid-flight. While they jump in the air at the circus show, they turn from a panther to a human. And again, this audience don't really seem to think that's worth worrying about. Oh, that's a good trick that he turned literally in midair from a panther to a human. So Emil is one of the panthers here, and he has butchered a family to show, we can do this, but also to take vengeance upon that little part of the town. And it stirs up trouble amongst the villagers, blah 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 blah, so much that we've seen before. But the villagers again think it's just the animals, so go in to shoot the animals. That doesn't solve anything because it's not the animals. Well, it kind of is because some of the animals are also human, but some of them aren't, or they're vampire. We're going to really get into it in the review, don't worry. And one of the young girls of the town, the daughter of the professor, she's having an affair with Emil as well. Blah 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 blah. And I'm really just going to have to skip towards the climax of the film where you know exactly what's going to happen. They do realize there is indeed the vampire circus who are to blame for all their woes. The last remaining child of the citizens of 15 years ago plays a big part. And she's Dora. She plays quite a big part in the climax of the film, as does her boyfriend, John Mulder Brown's Anton. John Mulder Brown's a great young actor at this point, but this is really his last kind of hurrah. He was in Skilmowski's Deep End, and he was in The House That Screamed, which you can stick a review on below because I've done one. So the young lovers that they are, they're two of the children who have, of course, been cursed to die, so they're going to be part of the fight, and the villagers fight to protect the children. The villagers are joined by the children themselves, and the vampire circus fight back. Blah 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 blah. And then it turns into a completely standard ending, which I don't need to spoil because you know exactly what it is. They defeat the vampires. The end. Review time. This film, if you can't guess it from the way I just traipsed through the synopsis, is a mess. An absolute mess. A farce, really. There are some nice ideas. There are parts where you think there's a good film here. The vampire circus idea itself, with the vampires being animals who transform, quite an interesting notion. But the film doesn't have the courage of its convictions and relies too much on let's go back to be a gothic. Let's get back to Count Mitterhouse's story. The House of Mirrors is a gateway to his old castle. So they go back to the old ways very quickly. Instead of thinking, we've got a new way of doing vampirism here, let's follow this through. They throw that asunder. We'll come back to it. Part of the reason I think you can slightly excuse things but not forgive is that Robert Brown, making his directorial debut, as I said at the top, Robert Young rather, he was told by Hammer, you've got 6 weeks. Now, normally that means you've got 6 weeks, and if you need a day or two, don't worry about it. For Hammer, you've got 6 weeks, means at the end of week 5, day 6, you best be finished. He wasn't. He was still a week behind. So there's a week of this film of shooting that's just not done at all. Hammer took the film off him, gave it to the editor, and said, do what you can, try and fix it. So there are things in here that aren't paid off but have a setup. There are things that have a setup and then no payoff. And there are things that just don't make sense whatsoever. For example, Anna, the wife who runs away at the start, the servant of the Count Mitterhouse. She is the leader of the vampire circus, but she's come back with a completely different face, so her own husband doesn't recognize her. There are a few moments where her face morphs back through a very bad effect, which was clearly done in post production quickly in the editing suite because they hadn't filmed the scenes required where she would have a confrontation with her ex-husband to say, it was me, and this is how I've done it. I've studied the black magic and changed my appearance to bring vengeance upon you and serve the Dark Lord. Those scenes just aren't here at all. those scenes that are completely required for the film to make a lick of sense. She just turns up looking like I mean, it's a different actress, so of course she looks completely different. It's a bizarre, bizarre decision from Hammer not to give him just a little bit more time at least to get the essentials done. But they wouldn't give him anything whatsoever. So characters come and go here, who you think you needed a bit more screen time to resolve your. Oh well, I guess you're gone from the film. There are characters mentioned who don't even appear on screen. The students upstairs. Anyone who's seen it will know about the infamous students upstairs. They're mentioned about 10 times. We never see them because they were going to be filmed the next week. Hmm. It's incredibly frustrating. And again, the actions of the villagers is incredibly frustrating because their idiocy blinds them to everything. And I don't think even Cushing Finger, I don't think even a week's shooting would have saved that because everything that they do in their idiocy is a bizarre choice. Why would they not question the Vampire Circus's ability to get through the barricades? Why would they not question people transforming in midair? Why would they not believe their leader, as he says, the Count's returned, even though they all do believe in the Count's curse anyway? It's not as if they're a village of, oh, it's just superstition. They were all there. They were all bloody there. So I'm putting a lot of hope that that missing seventh week of filming would have fixed a lot of problems here, but I'm completely convinced it's false hope. I think this was a lost cause, personally. One thing that slightly redeems it is Gypsy Woman herself, Adrienne Corey, as the leader of the Vampire Circus. Again, who's supposed to be Sarah from the start of the film, but there's no real connection made whatsoever. She is alluring, she's inviting, she's seductive, she's exactly what a proper Hammer villainess needs to be. I think she's wonderful in the role, and she's bringing a lot to the table. She, I don't think it's unfair to say, steals the show, but unfortunately, given the rest of it, stealing the show is still petty theft. It's a good line, isn't it? She brings a lot to the table in terms of just enjoy the show, everybody, and it's a wonderful time and inviting and just don't think about it too much. She has seductive charms and um, she's the kind of character who this film needs, but her character isn't established enough because of, again, this mythical seventh week, which would have hopefully have given her a complete structure and a spine to the character and a connection to the main plot, which the film is entirely missing, as is the establishment of the very late introduction of Dora, who ultimately is her daughter, but again, that's not really established either because of this missing shooting. And the relationship between Dora and Anton comes out of nowhere, absolute nowhere. So I don't even think that Robert Young was a week behind. I think he would needed a month to get something out of this. So we've got an hour and 20 of film here, which is normal Hammer length. But what that tells me is that a lot of this would never have been in the final film. Because if this is already normal length Hammer and it was going to play as a double feature, then whatever he was going to film in that next week would have replaced some of what's here. So I refuse to believe that this is anything like what the final version of the film should have been like. If so, if it is indeed roughly what the final film was going to look like, then all involved should be ashamed because it's a joke. It's a farce. It's easily the worst Hammer vampire film. Easily. Including Dracula AD 72 or insert your least favorite Dracula here. Scars of Dracula for a lot of people. Well, I've got a fondness for that. But anyway, the film just does not work on pretty much any level apart from thinking that one of two things. One, that, hey, if they got that extra week, it might have saved things. I think that's letting the what if do a lot of heavy lifting. But two, I think there's an interesting story to be told with a vampire circus, with a different type of vampire, the animalistic vampire, literally, And ignore the gothic stuff. Don't resort to the vampire wearing the cape. Don't go back to the old castle. Have it be a more interesting take, just like Countess Dracula did. Have it be something fresh. I think there's a really interesting idea here, and Adrienne Corey's the perfect lead for it. She has that kind of Kate O'Mara quality to her, where you can completely believe her as a heroine, but 100% believe she's a bad bitch underneath. She brings that to it perfectly. And I'm sorry that the film that she's in isn't good enough for her, to be honest. I mean, the parts are all played fine. Nobody stands out apart from Adrian Corey. I think Thorley Walters always hams it up far too much for me when he's in a Hammer film. Never serves the film terribly well. He's in a couple of, he's in what? Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed and Frankenstein Created Women. Nah, he's too much for me. He's a cartoonish character. And I think in here it's quite a cerebral, fresh take on the vampire film for Hammer in the way that Captain Kronos would be, in the way that Countess Dracula would be, but it's just not here. And the film cowers and retreats back to the Gothic castle, like the vampire on the run from the villagers retreats back to his Gothic castle, which I think is a terrible shame. I think it's a real shame because it lets down Adrian Cordy's performance. It lets down the general good idea of the circus and their unique take on the vampire mythos, and just resorts to vampire stakes, dripping blood on the skeleton, blah 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 blah. Done a million times. I think it's the most cowardly and the least of any Hammer film, frankly. Would they make worse films? Well, if you want to include non-Hammer horrors, you've got the On the Buses and the likes and Love Thy Neighbor and blah blah blah. But for me, this is one of my least favorite Hammer horrors overall. So we'll wrap it up there. But I really wanted to cover something that I really didn't like this month, uh, because I didn't want it to just be everything's great. Isn't everything awesome at Hammer? We need to recognize what's bad to know what's great. And believe me, this is bad. But join me tomorrow, won't you? As we're going to be talking about something that's a little bit better, to say the least. Lust for a Vampire, the second in the Karnstein trilogy. So that's a mini series inside a bigger mini series, medium series inside a large series, as that's part two of the Karnstein trilogy, inside Vampire Weekends, inside Hammerween, I think. But until then, sleep tight and don't have nightmares.